Now, politicians are being urged not to forget the homeless ahead of the local government elections. Cape Town-based NGO U-turn has launched a campaign called #ThisIsWorking. Now, this is to highlight the importance of drafting better policies and development programs for the homeless. I'm joined now by the director of U-turn, that's Ray Knighton-Fitt, to discuss their cause. Ray, thank you very much for your time. How bad is the situation in areas where you work with people living on the streets?
Yeah, it's an extremely bad situation. We work in Cape Town as U-turn, about 14,000 people living on the streets of Cape Town, but really across the city, Johannesburg, across the country, Johannesburg as well, many areas in the country, there is a very serious issue and a growing issue of people being homeless as a result of the COVID-19 lockdowns.
Now, would it be a fair view to say politicians in the main are ignoring the homeless, or we as ordinary citizens also have a role to play and we haven't done that much?
I think it's both ordinary citizens, of course, and politicians. We need policies that work. One of our big problems in Cape Town has been the bylaws around homelessness, or the streets and public places bylaws, which have really supported a reactive kind of approach to homelessness rather than a rehabilitative approach. And this has been a historical problem in Cape Town. I'm disappointed, to be honest, in the response of politicians to the issue of homelessness. It's not that there hasn't been any response at all. Of course, there has been. But considering the severity of the situation at the moment, and the fact that homelessness, although it's in many ways the tip of the iceberg of poverty, it is that tip that we see, that policymakers see, that the private sector sees, that's very much in the face of the public. And very little is being said or done, at least, let's say, much too little is being said and done about the issue of homelessness from the perspective of politicians.
Can you take us through perhaps the right approach or the rehabilitative approach to homelessness? What should we be doing, or politicians better?
I think the key is to understand that it's a long-term approach. So much of what is done is, as I say, it's either reactive and punitive, or else it's sort of a handout, bread and soup and a blanket and pat on the back, God bless you, you know. And that doesn't work. You need a long-term approach which uses the best knowledge and the best we have in terms of occupational therapy, social work, psychology, which takes somebody through a process. And what we do at U-turn is we start with engaging people on the street, and then on a journey, we call it the Ignite program, but on a journey which helps them to contemplate and think about leaving the street, to get them to a point of saying, okay, I'm ready. And then they'll move into a drug or alcohol rehab program, because about 70% of people living on the street plus have an addiction problem. And that will normally take 3, 4, 5 months before they're in stable and sober in that sense. And then we move them on to an 18-month work program where they're in sheltered employment. At the same time, they're getting a lot of support, group work and one-on-one support, counseling, life coaching, until the point that they have dealt with a lot of their own stuff and the relationships that have broken down over the years, and they're in a stable place. And we find that those who graduate from our program, we have about an 80 to 86% success rate long-term of people that remain sober, employed, and in brick and mortar housing. So we advocate a long-term approach, not a kind of hit and run, here's a cup of soup, or even here's a simple job. It's not enough. People are very traumatized by living on the street. There are serious issues that landed them there in the first place, and you have to actually deal with those if you want to get them off and keep them stable in the long term.
But then some could argue that some of these interventions have been there since time immemorial. We've always had rehab centers, but you find people that after a certain period of being clean find themselves back into those, either it's narcotics, so they go back into that lifestyle yet again. So what would you say to that?
It's obviously true. There are those, I mean, it's a common thing with anybody who's been in addiction recovery or is familiar with that world. People come in and out, and they relapse. What's important is that there is a will and especially from somebody who's homeless, there needs to be a strong will and desire to get off the street. It's not enough to force somebody, or, they'll go through the motions and then they'll relapse. At the same time, they've got to have long-term support. We will expect there will be people who drop off during the program. That's what happens. There will be people who, even after graduating the program, go back to the streets. What's important for us is continually sharpening that tool, if you like, to say, looking at the data constantly, what makes something successful, what makes a program successful, what kind of interventions work better, what don't work as well, what are the commonalities. And so that's something we constantly do, very data-driven, experience-driven organization, constantly analyzing to say what is the best long-term approach. So yes, there'll never be 100% approach, or certainly we don't have it now. But it's really to keep on pushing towards a sustainable thing, not just to give up, because lots of people say, well, it's very difficult, you're going to have failures, so we'll just settle for a short-term intervention. But short-term intervention won't do anything at all. You'll have almost no success if you don't apply good developmental and rehabilitative principles to the process.
No, certainly a very commendable effort. That was Ray Knighton-Fitt, the director of U-turn, a Christian NGO based in Cape Town. Thank you very much for your time.